Welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry, brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada, your community for rational scientific skepticism from a secular humanist perspective. We have questions for today's top answers. I'm your host, Leslie Rosenblood, board member of the Centre for Inquiry Canada. Welcome. Today, I will be speaking with Caroline Russell-King about the reasons that she is in favor of Quebec's Bill 21. Caroline is an award-winning playwright who has written 30 plays, which have had 60 productions across Canada and the United States of America. She is a member and past vice president of the Playwrights Guild of Canada. She is published in 5 anthologies, and her latest trilogy of plays, Palliser Suite, was published by Frontenac House Press. Caroline has adjudicated plays nationally for contests and publishing houses. She also served on the board of the Alberta Playwrights Network and currently represents Western Canadian as ambassador for the Dramatist Guild of America. She co-wrote Strategies, The Business of Being a Playwright in Canada with Rose Schollard, published by the Playwrights Guild of Canada. Caroline teaches playwriting and leads the Artist Way groups at the Alexander Writers Center. For the last 3 years, she has taught creative writing to men who are recovering from addiction and have been formally incarcerated or have pending charges and are challenged with homelessness or mental health issues. When not working in theater, she likes hanging out with atheists. Her new musical is Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, the musical. The protagonist in that play is her personal hero, Christopher Hitchens. Today I talk with Caroline about Quebec's Bill 21 and her reasons for supporting it. I ask her about how she defines secularism and how that impacts her views on this bill and other topics. I ask her for her take on why Bill 21 is so controversial, and in turn she asks me how I, as a secularist, can be opposed to it. We talk about the harms that Bill 21 is designed to prevent and whether they warrant the non-trivial cost in terms of the freedom of expression that are inherent in Bill 21's provisions. And we get around, among other things, to talking about equal treatment under the law and what, if anything, Caroline believes should be changed within it. I'm glad that you are joining us today, and without further ado, I bring you my conversation with Caroline Russell-King. Hello, and welcome to the Podcast for Inquiry. I'm very pleased today to introduce our guest is Caroline Russell-King, and we'll be talking today about Bill 21. So first of all, Caroline, thank you very much for taking the time out of your day to talk with me. I think this is a topic of great interest, not only within Quebec, but throughout all of Canada. It's certainly been in the news a lot. And so I think, well, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are interested in this issue in Bill 21.
I'm a professional playwright, dramaturg. I'm also a theater critic. And I work as a volunteer in the atheist community. Why am I interested in this? I find that I'm interested in this because of the social cost to me. I find that when I speak about the things that I believe in as an atheist in this particular forum, I find that I get lumped with a whole bunch of other different people who think very differently than I do. And I find that it's the one issue that really sort of separates me out from the rest of the mostly liberals that I hang out with.
Okay. So this is called, the official name is Bill 21, but it has been referred to, I've seen it, it's not as much done so now, but certainly when it was introduced, it was referred to in the media as Quebec's secularism law. And I know that within the secular community, there was a deep split among people who were very happy that that's how it was referred to. And there were other folks also within the secular community of Canada who cringed every time Bill 21 was referred to as Quebec's secularism law. So before we get into the bill itself and what it contains, I'd like to know how do you define secularism? What does secularism mean to you, and how does as a supporter of Bill 21, I'm going to assume that it meets with your approval. So then, how does Bill 21 meet your definition of secularism?
I think it's about being neutral, right? It's the definition of being neutral, and I identify not necessarily as a secularist. I identify as uh, atheist and sometimes anti-theist. So that's sort of where
Okay.
I am. I don't identify as a humanist or a secular humanist or any of those lovely warm fuzzies. I'm probably a little bit on the harder edge, a little bit. Um, so, well, was I happy that it was labeled a secular law? Yes, I was, because I thought this is a this is a this is a good way to get things more front and center for the things that I believe in.
And so, what are those things that?
Neutrality. So neutrality.
So government neutrality in matters of religion. Okay.
Yeah, in terms of all outward signs, I'm I'm one of five people who are bringing an atheist from overseas to Canada. It's a long, drawn out issue, and he has a fatwa on his head. And I think about what would it be like for him if he were to get a parking ticket, or if he had to go to court and he had to see symbols of the country that has stripped him of his identity and everything that he owns, and tortured him, and um, so I think about those people. I think about the people who have those kind of extreme responses, and how to protect them in a Canadian culture where I think we're all welcoming, um, and we want yeah we just want to do what's right, I think.
So I mentioned this when I spoke with a woman a couple days ago about who was opposed to Bill 21, and she's also an atheist, much like yourself. And I think that although this bill has split the secular community like nothing else I have seen in my decade and a half of being a secular activist in Canada, I think that we can all agree that the work that you're doing to bring a person into Canada who is being persecuted, presumably, you didn't specify, I'm going to assume that he's being persecuted for his lack of faith, as opposed to, like,
Yep.
stealing
Yep.
something. But
No.
so he was outed as an atheist, and on that basis has a fatwa, as you said, and so
Yep.
I think you have the respect and admiration, certainly of myself and of everyone listening to this, and think that that is a wonderful thing that you're doing. And I think that we owe him a great deal of compassion and sensitivity, uh, given the experiences. And I don't want to go into the specifics of this person's life, but we need to bring that. However, those that would be opposed to Bill 21 uh, are also sensitive to the needs and desires of the tens or perhaps hundreds of thousands of people that also come. And I'll use Muslim countries as an example, or who themselves are Muslims, and who feel as a sense of personal identity, as a statement of their faith, that this is extremely important to them as individuals, and it would be um, quite traumatic. And these are people that are being quite sincere. There's no play acting happening here, and there's no exaggeration. It would be quite traumatic for them to have to choose between wearing a hijab or a kippah, or in the case of a committed Christian, perhaps a crucifix, to choose between wearing a symbol of their faith that is a part of their identity and their job, whether it be that of a police officer or a teacher. And so I'm curious. Uh, I'm sure this can't possibly be news to you. So, why you have come down very strongly on the side of this refugee that you're sponsoring, and again, with no criticism intended towards him, but why the needs of this individual outweigh the sincerely held beliefs and the harm that is being done to the sincerely held beliefs of the many others um, that are harmed by having to make that choice.
Yeah, I think there's two types of harm. I'm not interested in the harm where we take people's livelihoods away from them. I understand that that can be that's traumatic, and hopefully, if this all comes through, this will happen through attrition as opposed to people actually actively losing their jobs, et cetera, et cetera. I think what I am interested in is the difficulty that people might have to do when they are confronted with making these kind of decisions. And I think that one of the things we don't do in our very polite Canadian society is we don't question a lot of things. And we just kind of go, well, we conflate religion and morality together, and we make assumptions that it's all good, and that we also make assumptions that all religions are equal. We put the yarmulke on the same level as the crucifix. I don't think that's true. I think that there's more anti-Semitism than there is, for example, um, persecution against the Christian faith. And in terms of this, the new word, Islamophobia, which I don't think is a very useful word to use, but that's the group that I end up being lumped into, the person who wants to cause harm and wants to cause stress and wants to um, cause pain and anxiety for people. And I really don't. I'm interested in people having us being able to have this discussion and us being able to ask those hard questions.
Sure, and every secularist I speak of is not against the conversation. We can
Yeah,
ask the hard questions, we can talk about it, but what we're discussing here today is not someone forbidding a conversation or it even being a taboo thing or being gauche to bring up. What we're talking about is a law, and we're talking about a law that affects many people in our second most populous province, and whether asking questions and having the conversation and trying to figure out what's right and what's wrong, there should be very few things off the table. But when we're talking about a law that's going to be affecting many people, then uh, it becomes a little bit more urgent. Like, is this a good law? And so let's set aside. Let's set aside. I think we can agree we should have the conversation. The podcast for inquiry is all about having hard conversations, and that's one of the reasons why we're here today. But we're talking about a law that is forcing people to make a choice between donning their religious garments and having the career of their choice. And there is, I mean, you can, if you are an existing teacher, for example, or an existing a judge, you're not going to get fired if you continue to wear your religious garment. So you're not. It's not an imminent choice of you can't show up for work tomorrow, but you can't get promoted, you can't get transferred. You have to be in the one narrow role that you are in today without any change to it. Otherwise, you do face that choice. And anyone who is graduating, who has just spent the last several years in training for this role, does face that choice. Do they do the job that they've presumably wanted to do, that they've studied for, that they've trained for, and now can't get within the province, or do they remove the religious symbols? So I understand the need for sensitivity for those that have suffered under other regimes that are coming to Canada, where freedom of religion does not exist, and I am certainly sympathetic to the need of freedom from religion, and I consider freedom from religion to be co-equal with freedom of religion. Uh, but based on what you said, you seem to be prioritizing freedom from religion, freedom from religious symbols in certain circumstances over the freedom of religion for uh, a religious teacher or civil other civil servant to don headgear or a piece of jewelry. And so I'd like to explore why you've made that choice.
I think in the judiciary and in education, that's where it's important, and that because these symbols they send a message. There's a communication that's already happening, whether we're engaging with the symbols or not, and I think they're seen as benign, and I don't see them as benign. I see them as um, uh, more more influential and more um, toxic, I guess, in certain environments. And in that way, I think I'm in a minority.
Well, I think that it's fair to say, at least in my experience, you are in a minority outside of Quebec, and you live, I believe, in the province of Alberta.
I do.
So that certainly counts as outside of Quebec. But I wouldn't say that you are alone. But I would say that you are a minority of people that are supportive of Bill 21 outside of Quebec. But people who are against Bill 21 are a minority within Quebec, and it is quite popular. I think the latest survey I read was from earlier this year. I think it was March or so. It was before the Superior Court decision came down in April. So I believe it was March, and it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 2/3 of Quebecers were in favor in favor of that. So, do you have any ideas or any thoughts about why this is so? Why a majority of Canadians outside of Quebec oppose the bill and think it's a bad idea, while a majority of Canadians within the province of Quebec are supportive? Is it as simple as a yet another example of the Anglo-Franco divide, or do you think it might be um, a different understanding of what secularism means from the Anglo tradition versus the French laïcité? I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Quite honestly, I don't even know how to answer that. I mean, it's quite possible that the links with France and the issues that they're having in France may feed into some of this culturally, but I really don't know. And also, I understand the apparent hypocrisy between the strong Catholic faith that is part of that culture, and that these issues did not come up initially for the Christian faith. So I get all of that. I think the point I was trying to make before was that I am a minority of the in the liberal left, and I get put into the camp with some very unappealing people in Alberta, and people assume that I'm in that camp. And Alberta has unfortunately a really strong identity as being right wing and rednecky, and we we've been known to burn crosses in this province, as appalling as that is. I myself have a history of doing anti-racist work. I I've worked against racism, and can show a lot of cards on the table about, look, I am
Mhm.
a a person who has an anti-racist philosophy, and I understand how people say that the Quebec culture is focusing more on the Muslim religion, and maybe some anti-Semitism in there. I'm not sure, but be that as it may, it came to the fore, and now
Mhm.
I think we move forward. And I think it's as an employer, you have those rights. You have those rights to make those decisions on the people that you employ. There are, I hate to open the can even a little bit, but that some of the issues around anti-vax is the same type of thing. It's like, the employer has the right to request that you are vaccinated, and these are the new rules. This is new. We haven't dealt with this before. So let's look at it, and there are going to be people who are going to go to court over that and be very upset, and I understand that on some level.
I think that might be a bit. I'm just going to push back a little bit on the equivalency
Yeah, it's a bit
between
hyperbolic.
an employer mandate for vaccinations in the midst of a pandemic is about the health of not just the employee, but also their fellow coworkers and anyone they interact with. Like if you're in a public facing role, you, uh, you those that are unvaccinated are far more likely to be infected and to infect others. Vaccination is not perfect. I wish it were, but it's pretty darn good. It's something like 15 to 20 times less likely to both be infected or to be able to infect others. So there is a very strong public safety requirement, the same way that we demand that anyone working on or even attending a construction site wear a hard hat. There's a very clear objective safety requirement. So I would say that there's a kind of an objective need for that. In the terms of uh, whether religious symbols, that's a very personal expression. In almost all circumstances, it does not affect the carrying out of the core elements of a job. How it is interpreted both by the person wearing the religious symbol or the person viewing it, uh, it may be real, but that's there's not the same kind of public health. So I would say that analogy falls down a little bit there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's completely flawed. My question in return would be, how do we measure? You were talking about infect. How do we measure how those symbols infect on a different level? And of course, there's no biological measure. There's no way to actually do that. What is the impact of having these symbols in a kindergarten room? What are the
Mhm.
impacts? What is the impact in a courtroom? How does that infect in a different way? There's no way to measure it. There's no way to know. There's only hearsay and people talking about it, and it sounds very um, flaky for lack of a better word.
I'd like to explore that a little bit. So, if there's a woman who wears a hijab and she is a kindergarten teacher, so she's got 20 students. They're in kindergarten, so they're about 5 years old. They're going to see their teacher. Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that she's a good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's many women who wear hijabs. Many of them are teachers. There's going to be a range. Some are going to be excellent. Some are going to be middling. Let's say that she's a good teacher.
Mm-hmm.
So you use the term infect in that
I was
context.
picking. Oh, yeah, I was picking up on what you were saying because you
Okay,
were
well, when
saying
I said infect,
infect.
I was referring to the vaccination,
Literally, yes.
right? That we're in the midst of a pandemic here. So, assuming she's a good teacher, and she's got a class of 20 students, of whom, yeah, of varying backgrounds. What is the purported harm? What is the harm that we are preventing by mandating that she not wear the hijab? Well, let's say, and again, in this case, that this is someone who wants to, for whom being a teacher is more important. And let's assume that there is some harm. It hurts her emotionally to take it off, but she prefers being a teacher. So she'll be a good teacher with the hijab. She'll be a good teacher without the hijab. So, what is the harm that is being prevented by Bill 21? What is the harm that is being prevented by forcing her to make that choice and forcing her to uh, to be a teacher without wearing that religious garment?
What if the teacher is wearing the cross and the student is First Nations? What if we put it into those contexts? What if with all of the things that have just come to the fore in the news, um, uh, what would that be like for that child?
Certainly, it's not necessarily going to be great for that child, but uh, there are churches on almost every street corner. That is an exaggeration. There are churches everywhere in Canada, in every town, in every village, in every city, multiple Christian denominations, except in the smallest of communities. It is a fact of life that I believe that a majority of Canadians, slightly over half, still identify as some form of Christian. I do not think it would be realistic to expect that this child would not be exposed to a crucifix throughout his or her childhood.
Absolutely. I'm not saying this would be the first time, but it wasn't about it being the first time. It was about this being a teacher and them being a child.
Okay, let me quote. I'm going to quote, I'm going to quote for a bit from the decision from the Quebec from Marc Andre Blanchard. He is the judge that ruled largely in favor of Bill 21. He carved out a couple of exceptions, primarily for sitting MNAs and for the English school board in the
Yes,
province.
which makes not a lot of sense, but yes.
But he ruled in favor of Bill 21 and found it constitutional. But he had some reservations about it. So I just want to read a couple of quotations. He found that the evidence undoubtedly shows that the effects of Bill 21 will be felt negatively above all by Muslim women. He said that, or he wrote rather, and this is based on a translation because obviously the ruling itself was in French, that those targeted by the law are faced with the following dilemma: either they act according to their beliefs or they work in the profession of their choice. It is easy to understand that this is a cruel consequence which dehumanizes those targeted. Uh, he says that it imposes significant costs in terms of rights and freedoms with questionable justification. And this is the quotation: the denial by Bill 21 of the rights guaranteed by the Charter has severe consequences for the persons concerned. On the other hand, the beneficial effects appear at least tenuous. So, this is someone who ruled in favor of the bill, but he's arguing using fairly strong language here that this imposes serious costs for questionable benefits. And I'm wondering, do you share that perspective? And does that do you feel that the benefits like do you feel that the benefits are greater than Justice Blanchard feels, or that the costs are far less? Because I'm assuming that you feel that the benefits of this bill outweigh the costs.
I think it's something that we're going towards. I think it's an ideal that's ahead of its time, and this is going to be an incredibly well, bumpy is an understatement. Yes, it will be very very difficult um, to go through this, but what a fantastic standard to set. What a great place to try to achieve. What a great pinnacle to get to, where we have neutrality in courts and in education. What a fantastic thing.
Okay, so I'm someone who is very much in favor of government neutrality in matters of religion. And I'm finding this conversation fascinating, and I'm very glad that I've spoken with you because most of the people that I've spoken with that are in favor of Bill 21 define secularism as the separation of church and state.
Hmm.
Those are very similar things. Government neutrality and government and church and state separation are there are subtle differences, but almost all the time, people with those two definitions of secularism come to the same conclusion, the same result. Bill 21 has split right down the middle. Those that are against Bill 21 define secularism as government neutrality. Those in favor of Bill 21 say that it's church and state separation because a teacher, a police officer, a judge is an agent of the state, an employee of the state, therefore represents the state. So the kippah, the hijab, the crucifix, worn by an employee of the state, therefore carries the state's implicit approval. And because of the principle of separation, we must forbid that. But you're saying that you favor neutrality, And government neutrality generally means that uh, that government should neither support nor suppress religious expression among people, and this, I think, counts as religious suppression. Now, whether that whether, or rather, suppression of religious expression, I think is a better way to phrase it. So, this bill suppresses religious expression, and the question then becomes: is this a justifiable suppression of religious expression? And some secularists say no. We don't want the government to support or suppress religion. And you're saying that the ideal, you say neutrality, but I'm wondering, like, do you mean where there is this perhaps what you described earlier as your anti-theistic desires coming to the fore?
Probably. I'm I'm very open to that. Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, separation of church and state. Yes, I don't tend to have the conversations around separation of church and state just because that's a very American sort of way of thinking, and it's not the Canadian multicultural way of thinking. But of course, I'm for separation of church and state.
Yes. Okay. Well, and it's usually not an either or. Those that define secularism as government neutrality obviously support the separation of powers. Nobody in the secularist community wants religion to dominate politics, and most of the secularists that I speak with, though not all, don't want government to regulate or mandate what religious faith is tolerable or acceptable, or how they have to do things. So there's a huge overlap, and I'm just trying to tease out whether those differing definitions is uh, whether it's a distinction without a difference, or whether there's some insight to be gained there. I still want to get back to uh, the potential harm. So I have four kids, and they all go to public school. I live in Toronto, and so it is a simple fact that within my neighborhood, my kids see and are exposed to Christians and Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, atheists, and so on. It's a reasonably diverse community, and I have spoken with my kids about Christianity, about Judaism, about Islam, a little bit less about Sikhism and Hinduism, mostly because I'm just not as familiar with that. But they are aware that these faiths exist, and so why would an article of clothing, a hijab or a yarmulke, um, be threatening? Would it that infect my children if they saw it on a teacher, when they see it on the street and in the community? Why is that threatening, or in some way harmful, that so harmful or so threatening that it requires a law to protect the child, instead of it simply being a fact of life, a fact of existence in a pluralistic, we can say multicultural society. Which, granted, Toronto is not Quebec, but the large municipalities in Quebec are uh, also enjoy a wide range of different faiths, different types of people uh, living within a community together.
I also have a child. She's older now, but I also exposed her to different kinds of religions as well. And I think that that's good and noble, and we all want to do that. But I think we don't want to make sense that all these religions are equal.
You said that before. Explain to me, what do you mean by that? That the different faiths are not equal. I mean, certainly Hinduism is not Sikhism. Christianity is not Islam. So there's like it, but I think you don't. I don't think that you mean that, all faiths worship the same God when you say that they're not equal. What do you mean when you say that?
I think we have to take a note from Sam Harris's book, and we have to be able to look at the things that are happening with Islam that aren't happening with other religions, that aren't happening with the Jains, that aren't happening with the Buddhists. Uh, we look at the theocracies taking over. We look at apostasy. We look at the issues that aren't being addressed, the issues that are driving other people to lose their lives and to be tortured and to be kidnapped, and it's just not happening in at the same level with other religions. And we don't seem to be able to have a mechanism to talk about that. So um, that would be the first thing. But imagine the girl who is fighting with her father and doesn't want to cover her hair for the rest of her life. And if she is in a classroom where she feels like she could have an ally or someone that she could talk to, how fantastic would that be? But if she looks at a woman who is has bought into the same narrative as the one that she is feeling maybe oppressed by, then that's a problem.
Okay, so I would certainly I would be against anybody, whether it's the government or a parent or a community, telling a young girl what she must wear. And I'm against theocracies everywhere, whether it's the royal theocracy of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia or the increasing religious overtones in countries like Hungary or Poland, that where increasing religious influence over politics is being felt by people, primarily women, in restrictions of their rights. So whether whatever the faith, I'm certainly against inching towards theocratic regimes. But I would suggest that someone opposed to Bill 21 would say that government neutrality in matters of religion, a ramification of that is that the government should not tell young women or anyone really what they must wear, nor should it tell them what they must not wear. It should just remain neutral. If there are requirements for the job, you must wear a hard hat on a construction site, in public settings now, in a restaurant or in the shopping, in a supermarket, you must wear a mask. There's objective safety, health and safety reasons for that. But beyond job requirements, the government should just stay neutral and neither demand nor forbid any articles of clothing that a man or a woman wishes to wear. This I believe is the secularism as government neutrality argument. Is that something that you find persuasive in any way?
I think it's only persuasive in terms of I think this isn't the hill that I want to die on. So, so in all of the work that I do, or the political committees, or the things that I'm involved in, uh, am I going to be the um, the person who's at the front, or the person who's seen as um, the person who wants to oppress and cause all of this pain and anguish, take away people's jobs? No, I don't. But I still believe that it is something that we need to get to, and that um, it's an ideal. It is an ideal for me. Do you see that at all, or um, do you think that it could be an ideal that we could get to, or do you just think it's just such an imperfect world, or there's so many other reasons that it's
So for me, there's a difference between the world that I want to see and what I'm comfortable being achieved through legislation.
mm-hmm.
Anatole France wrote a wonderful quotation in which he said, "The law, in its majestic equality, forbids the rich and poor alike to sleep under bridges, to beg in the streets, and to steal their bread." And the point of that is that a law that is perhaps written neutrally, or in the sense that there's no specific language targeting one group or another, uh, nonetheless has a disproportionate effect. And I think it is undeniable that Bill 21 has a disproportionate effect on Muslim women. They're not the only people affected by it, but even the judge ruling in favor of it noted that, and a lot of other people have noted that as well. There is some debate about whether that disproportionate effect was intentional or not. I don't particularly want to delve into that because I have no insight into that, so I don't think it's worth worth delving into. But I do think that it is uh, empirically true that the effects fall disproportionately on Muslim women in Quebec, and I think that the means of achieving an end are almost as important as the end itself, and that if we violate the principle of neutrality, which is very important to me in this case, even if it's for a cause uh, that you might think is noble, that can be turned down the road. The current government of Quebec will not always be the government of Quebec. There'll be somebody else elected premier, another party in the next election, and if not the next election, the one after that. That's what happens. That's good. That's healthy. Otherwise, you've got a one party state. That's bad. Not really something I'm worried about in Canada at the moment. So, how comfortable am I with a future government where I have no idea who's going to be in power in Quebec or federally or wherever with having that capability? And that's what makes me nervous. It sets a precedent for having laws that disproportionately affect disfavored groups. And as a secularist, I also am an atheist. In many circles, that is also a disfavored group. And I don't want there to be a precedent for disfavored groups to be disproportionately targeted by legislation. So I certainly would like us to have a society with a lot fewer ardent believers. I have no objection to people that just go to their house of worship on occasion, but I believe that people can be both good and religious. I am highly skeptical of the claim that people are good because they're religious.
Absolutely. Yeah, morality is a separate construct.
Yes. And I will stand by you and everyone else uh, to reinforce what I believe to be that truth, that religion and morality are separate. They're not mutually exclusive, but they are separate. And uh, I want that to be far more well understood. And I work a lot for that goal. And but I worry when there is a bill that, even if I might approve of the overall vision, I might not approve of it if I feel the means compromise the principles, because that gives tools to some that might empower someone down the road to use the same tool set in a different way.
So it's the thin end of the wedge for you, the fear.
Very much so.
Yeah.
I don't want to win because I'm the strongest, because
Hmm.
I'm the most influential, I'm the most persuasive. Persuasive is good, but the most influential are the most powerful,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm not always going to be the most influential or the most powerful, or my group or the people that hold my set of beliefs. It needs to be based on principles that I can stand behind, because if I can do it on the basis of principle rather than power, it's going to be a lot harder to erode and subvert down the road. I'm thinking about the long term here.
Hmm. Interesting. I guess I see myself standing more shoulder to shoulder with people like uh, Ayaan Hirsi Ali and the
Hmm.
people who are fighting all over and have had death threats and have all of the women who are fighting for no headscarf, right? Who are voting for no hijab, no.
Yeah.
Those are the women I imagine myself being on this same side with.
Hmm.
It's possible that there is no, I mean, just everything is messy, and that there is no one outcome, and that could this all go sideways? Could we end up, could things turn to fascism? I guess so. I don't know. Things can be corrupted and polluted at any time. To your point, there are 13 countries still where I can be killed just for being an atheist, right? So
Yeah. And as I said, that is terrible and something that we need to work on to change. And I will stand steadfastly against uh, laws against apostasy, theocracies everywhere. Religious justification for any kind of law or regulation is anathema to my sense of justice and morality. And I have great respect for people like Yasmin Mohammed and Ayan Hirsi Ali, and enormous that they have come through their experiences and are able to spend the rest of their lives fighting against the injustices that they suffered as young women. I have enormous respect for them, and I would say that again, speaking to most secularists against Bill 21 does not imply being in favor of the hijab or thinking or being in favor of they were just they are equally passionate against any mandate that women must wear the hijab as they are against Bill 21 that says you cannot. And it's
do you equate those two things together?
well,
Are those equal to you?
it depends on the context. I would say, like, if we're talking about countries like Afghanistan in the past year or the past several months, or Saudi Arabia, um, then I mean, the mandate that you must wear a hijab is absolutely far more significant. So but in Quebec, there might be small communities or individual families where there is that type of coercion, and yes, that's a problem, and we need to find a way to address that. And I don't know what the answer is because that's tricky and complicated. But there's a law right now that is in full effect that says in these professions you cannot wear them. So uh, so in some contexts, the mandate that you must wear a hijab is overwhelmingly more significant. And in other contexts, specifically in Quebec, the mandate that you cannot is more significant to the people of that province um, than cases where there is unwarranted pressure or coercion to wear one.
Could you see a possibility where a woman might have to say to her family, "Listen, I have no choice. It's part of my employer is asking me to do this, and if I want to maintain this, this is what I have to. I now have to do this," and then passing the buck over to the bill.
Sure, I can imagine that. I know that in Turkey, for example, they for decades said that there will be no hijabs worn on university campuses. They banned it, and if there were anonymous surveys done of women that attended of students, and they were massively in favor of that because there was overwhelming societal pressure to be a good Muslim, you had to wear the hijab, and they felt tremendous relief. And this is a majority. This is not, of course, universal, but a majority of women felt relief that they could go without wearing the hijab, without because they could pass the buck to the law, to the regulation. That said, there were also many women who were attending university in Turkey who wanted very much to wear the hijab. They were a minority in that circumstance, or at least according to the surveys that I read, that they wanted to and were forbidden, and they felt that was wrong. I would say that in Quebec, again, I'm not aware of studies, so I don't know how to quantify it. But my sense certainly is that the number of women who feel coerced to wear a hijab and are relieved that they don't have to is far smaller than the number of women, or the number of Muslim women who would choose to wear the hijab and now cannot if they are teachers. And um, so on a balance of harms basis, Bill 21 does more harm than good.
How do you quantify the harm? How do you measure the emotional, psychic harm? Talk to me about that a little bit.
It's anything that prevent someone from expressing themselves the way they want to express themselves is a harm to society. I'm someone who is a believer in free expression, not in an absolute sense. I have no objection to limited and well crafted laws against slander, libel, impersonation, death threats, threats of violence like that. I've got no objection. You can have badly written laws if they're well written, limited, well crafted laws, but the default is I'm in favor of free speech and of free expression and of freedom of conscience. And if that involves wearing a particular piece of headgear or a particular piece of jewelry, and there is legislation without that type of justification behind it, barring that expression, I think society is harmed by that, as well as however it is that somebody feels about not being able to do the thing that they want to do, and that's going to be individuated. Everyone's going to react differently. For some people, it might be, it's a pain, whatever, and for some people, it might strike to the core of their identity. I'm not going to be able to quantify that for you, but I will argue that when a segment of society is not able to express themselves in the manner in which they choose, that is detrimental to a thriving, vibrant culture.
I hear you. I too stand by people's right of self-expression and body modification, and in any form. I think that's great, but I also think an employer has a right to make choices around that for whatever reason. I wouldn't want uh, a Satanist who was really a Satanist to bring their things into the classroom any more than I would want somebody who had tattoos who I thought were inappropriate or didn't fit my political ideology. And and people have the right to have their deep feelings about things. And there's a time and a place.
I appreciate your time, and I think we're drawing close to the end. But I want to ask one more question based on what
Sure.
you just said, and that you mentioned about employer rights. So let's say I am a devout, I don't know, pick a faith. It doesn't matter. I am devout, and I am an employer. And
A
so,
devout employer, yes.
yeah, well, no, sorry. I'm a devout, I'm a devout Jew, or a devout
Okay.
Christian, or I'm a devout Muslim, and I have some number of employees. I am an employer as well as being a devout follower of one faith or another. So, would I, as an employer, have the right to demand of my employees before we start today's shift, let us all bow our heads in prayer and worship the deity that means so much to me as an employer, regardless of whether you are, a mild follower of that faith or a follower of a completely different faith, or an atheist. Do I, as an employer, have that right, or should I, as an employer, have that right to demand a prayer essentially as a condition of employment before we start work for the day?
I think it makes a big difference whether you're running a courtroom or arresting fugitives or teaching grade school versus where you have a company that's making widgets or you're providing goods and services. I think that's a different discussion.
So when you say and employers' rights, what you really mean is that someone who, at least implicitly, is representing the state versus a private employer.
Yes.
There's a distinction. The state can say to maintain strict neutrality, you can't wear
Yes.
religious symbols. So
Yes.
it's not really so much employers' rights. I mean, I'm just using the phrase that you use, but it's not so much employers' rights as it is the need for the state to maintain neutrality is paramount. So these restrictions are justified, whereas a private employer does not have that privilege.
Yes.
Okay. So one final question: you are in support of Bill 21. Uh, do you think it's a perfect bill, or even though you generally support it, is there anything about it that you would change? And if so, what?
Well, I think it's I'm I haven't studied the bill, and I haven't read the whatever is it 263 page. I confess I have not. So
Well, the bill isn't that long. That's the 240 pages is the decision of the Quebec Superior Judge Court.
right. Anyway, have not read all those documents. Do I think there should be exceptions, though? No. As soon as you start bringing the exceptions in, then you sort of lose all your integrity. So I would want to see it in everywhere.
Okay. Any final thoughts then?
No, I appreciate having the conversation. I'm glad we could have this conversation. I know it's a difficult conversation. It really makes me question things as well. So I'm happy to take away those
Well,
some of the points that you brought up. So I'm happy to take those away, and I believe in all the things that you believe in, which is logic and reason and all of those all of those criteria for coming to decisions. I think this is messy. I think we'll continue to talk about this for years and years.
Caroline, you've just made my heart sing. The entire point of the podcast for inquiry is to have difficult conversations and to get people to think and perhaps to reevaluate, not necessarily to change minds, but at least be more confident in the positions that they hold and the reasons that they hold them. So if I've succeeded in doing that with you, then I've already succeeded, and I'm hoping that our listeners will get a similar benefit. So, on behalf of the Centre for Inquiry Canada, thank you very much, Caroline Russell King.
Thank you. Thanks, Leslie.
This has been a pleasure. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Links related to today's discussion can be found in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's show, please subscribe and engage in the conversation. Comment, rate, and review. We'd love to hear your take on things. The podcast for Inquiry is brought to you by the Centre for Inquiry Canada. We rely entirely on donations to be your voice supporting science, free inquiry, critical thinking, and secularism here in Canada. To our supporters, thank you. If you have not yet contributed to CFIC, please consider making a donation at centreforinquiry.ca/donate or becoming a member for only $30 per year at centreforinquiry.ca/join. Your support makes it possible for us to continue making our collective demand for reason and evidence-based decision-making everywhere. Find us on Facebook and follow CFIC on Twitter at CFI Canada. See you next time.